Over the last few weeks, we've been looking at the unseen realm, what I'm calling virtual reality. And we've talked a little bit about Jehovah, of course, the focus of the biblical narrative. He's the one, the wronged party, the one who should be receiving from us and from all of His creation praise and glory and honor, and yet he doesn't get that. In fact, in a lot of cases, it's just plain old disdain. That coming on the heels of the rebellion against Him by two classes of individuals, one being the image bearers, the folks like you and me who were created by God to reflect into the universe God's power and glory and majesty and His character. And then the supernatural created beings that, for lack of a better term, we're just calling Elohim, because that's what the Scriptures call them. I'm certainly not an expert on them, and in fact, anybody who claims to be an expert is probably selling a book, because there's really not an awful lot in the Scriptures about them. Paul in the New Testament touches on them from time to time, and there's a little bit in the Old Testament. But there are so many of these concepts that we can probably delve quite a bit deeper into, and this idea of God's rightful place as ruler, as king of the universe, to whom we all submit freely. We don't have to be forced to submit. We submit, we bow the knee because He is worthy. I know when I was a kid, and I've laughed and mentioned this many times, but when I was a kid, when it was time for services to begin, we would sing that song, "The Lord is in His holy temple. Let all the earth keep silent before Him." And usually somebody sitting behind me would thump my ear, which was, my cue to, sit down and shut up. And, that's just... So, I even now when I hear that song, we don't sing it very often, but every time that song is sung, I kind of feel like, oh, shoot, man. Guard the earlobes, make sure you're not going to get thumped. And then Andrew, as I mentioned, did an outstanding job presenting the prosecutor who shall not be named. He doesn't have a name. We've come to refer to him by his job description, which is prosecutor or opposer or adversary. And so those are kind of the high points of some of the things that we've been talking about over the last little bit. But what I want to do for a moment here, have you guys heard of this? The birds aren't real? So I hadn't either until this morning. I was researching some things on this sermon, and you know how Google just kind of offers up articles for you to read. Well, one of them was an article on birds aren't real, and I at first I just dismissed it as clickbait, but then I noticed that the birds aren't real article was a New York Times article, and so I thought, well, what in the world? So I clicked on it, and of course New York Times wouldn't let me read it unless I paid them money, and I wasn't about to pay them any money. So then I decided, well, I'll just Google it and find out what that's all about. And sure enough, there is a growing movement of mostly young folks who believe that several years ago the government killed all the birds. And and that everything that you see flying overhead, and are government drones that are spying on us. And I am not making this up. Guys, it's totally. And if you're one of these people who believes that, then I love you, man. I'm not. But I'm gonna tell you, these folks are like crazy about this, and they've got all the evidence to back up their philosophy, and I think wow, real is really a strange concept, isn't it? In our culture, it's extremely difficult for us to even get a sense of. It makes me think of the statement that Paul makes about humanity in Romans chapter 1, in which he says, professing themselves to be wise, they have become what? Fools. Right? My ancestors left paradise in search of wisdom and moral truth. I'm somewhat reminded of Joey on the show Friends, and this isn't an endorsement of that, but my kids are constantly sending these animated GIFs, back and forth, and I get the privilege of looking at one, and Joey talking to Phoebe. Phoebe is saying something about how Joey was kind of like her dad, and always giving her wisdom. And of course, if you know Joey, he's not anywhere close. And Joey makes this statement with a rather arrogant look on his face. I am rather wisdomless. So I love that. We left, my ancestors left the garden paradise searching for truth and wisdom, and we think we're pretty wisdomless folks. They placed this search for moral truth above a relationship with the one who spoke everything into existence, if you can imagine that. And of course, I think it's pretty easy for us to imagine it, because we still are carrying on that tradition to some extent, each of us. That should be they instead of thee. They left paradise idolizing knowledge. And so one of the things, and I don't have a passage of Scripture that I can point to tell you why I believe this. So in fact, as we were singing that last song and I was kind of getting my thoughts together and thinking about the outline, I thought, I need to tell you that this is my own philosophy, but it comes out of a question that I was asked many years ago by a young lady that I had the privilege to bring to the Lord, and she was kind of working through several of the big questions that people who really have never thought through the Christian narrative, and then are presented with the Christian narrative. There's obviously some big questions, right? That hit you in the face. One of them is Jesus is hanging on the cross. He's all powerful, God Almighty in human flesh, and here this tiny little created being is standing there saying, if you're really the Messiah, why don't you come down from the cross? And she asked me the question. Do you know what question she asked? Yeah, exactly. Why didn't he come down from the cross? She said, then everybody would have believed, right? Can you imagine the statement that would have made if Jesus had just said, okay, and just stepped down off the cross? Well, yeah. But see, here's the thing. There is something about this biblical narrative almost from the very beginning that is encased in this concept that the righteous will walk by faith. That it's not about what we know Now, I need to stipulate that knowledge brings us to faith. It's kind of a conundrum. Knowledge brings us to faith. We don't have an uninformed faith. I can tell you why I believe, but at some point, this informed faith that I have, or this knowledge that I have, brings me to this precipice where God says, okay, this is as far as knowledge goes. And the rest of this walk, you're going to have to step out into a place that your intellect doesn't like. It's a place that you're not going to be able to prove in a lab. It's not empirical in any sense of the term. You're just going to have to step out in faith. And so we do that. And obviously the question is, well, I mean, God, why not? Why don't just come down here, Jehovah, just come down here and have a conversation with us, and then it'll, then everybody would be believers, right? If God just stepped out of, wait a minute. He did do that though, didn't he? Right? He pulled on human flesh. And he stepped into our three-dimensional world, and he walked right up to people and said, "Hi, how are you doing?" And it was the problem is not that he hasn't already done that. The problem is that there is something about this rebellion that happened in the garden, where man said, we are walking out of here and we're going to find our own truth. We're going to find our own moral imperative. And the problems that ensued as a result of that have been, they have been devastating, right? And so God says, here's the cure. Because, and I think it's because we left paradise looking for moral truth and wisdom on our own terms. Because we did that, God says the fix is, or part of the fix is, you're going to have to step out in faith. You're going to have to leave intellect behind, right? Part of the cure is to abandon knowledge and to walk by faith. And we've talked some about that in previous sermons, so I won't re-preach those. It's kind of like that statement in Star Wars, you remember, where Obi-Wan says to Luke, use the Force, Luke, except not at all. It's more like, Luke, let the Force use you. But the idea of closing your eyes and stepping out in faith, which is laughable in our culture. I mean, the truth is, if I'm just being honest, this is one of those brushstrokes in the biblical narrative that doesn't play well at all in our culture. We are scientific, empirical, we love data, we want to have a spreadsheet that charts it and graphs it and proves it beyond a shadow of a doubt. And but before we take any step, we were Brad was kind of laughing about an ad that he saw on TV where this boardroom is full of the same people, and they're having a conversation. I haven't seen that ad, but I love it. And but it illustrates this conversation that we consistently have when it comes down to making decisions on anything. You've got, one piece of you that says, yeah, we should do it. And another piece of you that says, no, we shouldn't do it. I've done the numbers and it doesn't work. That's our culture. We want it to all, we want the spreadsheet to prove it before we step. And yet God says, I've given you all the evidence that I'm going to give you. The rest of it is just going to be by faith. And so one of the things that God does, I know this is kind of a long intro, but bear with me because I've got a point I want to make. Yahweh consistently creates mystery and refuses to solve it. Have you ever noticed that? Have you guys ever come across anything in the scriptures and said, "Well, I don't understand that"? Here's a good one, and I'll just tell you. If you look at a synopsis of the Gospels, most of us think of the Passover that Jesus ate with his disciples as the meal that he had when he disrobed and washed the feet of the disciples. And you remember, he says, he begins to wash the... Now, what were the disciples doing? Do you guys remember? They were arguing about which one of them was the most important one in this new administration, right? And so Jesus shows them who's the most important. John chapter 13, he disrobes and he moves around among them and washes their feet. And Peter says, "You're not going to do that. You're not going to wash my feet." And Jesus says, "Well, then I don't have anything. You have no part with me." And Peter says, "What? Well, yeah, wash my head and my hands and just give me a bath." But if you look at a synopsis of the Gospels, that cannot possibly have been the Passover feast. Or if it was, Jesus ate 2 Passovers. And so people on the outside who stand opposed to our faith will say, "Well, see, there's an obvious and extremely large contradiction." Maybe it is. Now, I'm going to propose something to you guys, and I wouldn't do this in a room full of people who aren't believers, because it sounds like circular thinking almost. But I'm just going to tell you that I believe that God creates these on purpose, because He wants there to be mystery, and He wants us to have to step out in faith and just say, "Okay, I don't have an answer to that, but I'm still going to put my weight down on this," right? Does that make sense? I have done, as you guys know, an enormous amount of study on the Passover, and that was one of the most fruitful studies for me over the last few years. But it created some questions that I don't have answers for, and one of them is, did Jesus eat 2 Passovers? I suppose you could eat 2 Passovers. There's nothing wrong with that. But chronologically, something doesn't jive there. And so God, what's the answer? And God says, "Don't worry about it. Just trust me," right? Okay. The Bible leaves gaps and apparent contradictions. And folks believe that disqualifies the Bible or Yahweh in general as truth. So, what we're going to do today, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about the Angel of Jehovah. And I am not going to try to make him more understandable, because I believe that the ambiguity is there for a reason. That He intends, God intends, and the biblical writers intended to leave gaps that force us to become accustomed to mystery. But I want to begin with Genesis chapter 16, and it's a story. Those of you who've been through the Bible a few times are probably quite familiar with. Sarai, Abram's wife, was barren, and she had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. So she says to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. So go sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her. And Abram agreed. What an unwieldy text, right? I mean, it's isn't it? I mean, it's kind of despicable, really. It's despicable from Sarah's point of view, and despicable from Abram's point of view, or from our point of view, looking at Abram, and this is the guy, that occupies the anchor position in the Hall of Fame of Faith, right? In Hebrews 11. This is, the man that the Bible paints as the man of faith, and yet this and many other passages, by the way, that reveal a different side of Abraham, right? He and Sarai both were, somewhat despicable at times. So deal with it. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abraham had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai's wife took her Egyptian maidservant Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. And he slept with her, and she conceived. And when she knew that she was pregnant, when Hagar knew that she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. I don't have an explanation for that. But then Sarai said to Abraham, you are responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. I put my servant in your arms, and now that she knows that she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Well, them's was fighting words back in those days. Your servant is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you think best. And so Sarah begins to mistreat Hagar. We don't know what that means. We know what mistreating means, but the details we don't have. But I can imagine. So this is a young lady from another country, alone, pregnant, and being abused by the people who own her. So, you do the arithmetic. She would desperate be, and by the way, in most cultures, if a slave runs away, that's punishable by what? Yeah, death. So she flees from Sarai. And now here we go, verse 7. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? And she said, I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord said, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord, wait a minute. What did the angel just say? I want you to look. What did the angel of the Lord just say? He said, I will so increase your descendants. The angel said that? Who usually makes statements like that? Well, doesn't that sound like Yahweh himself talking to Abraham? I will so increase your descendants. They'll be like the stars of the sky or the sand of the sea. That sounds like Jehovah talking. Right? So is this angel of Jehovah, is it an angel or is it Jehovah? The angel of Yahweh. I will so increase your descendants, verse 9. I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now with child, and you will have a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard. Well, now the angel of the Lord is speaking as though the angel of the Lord is distinct from Jehovah himself. He says, he's calling on God. He's saying that God will, or Yahweh has heard of your misery. He will, now talking about Ishmael, he will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. And then Hagar gives this name to the Lord who spoke to her. Well, who spoke to her? The Lord, or was it the angel? And I love, by the way, I love the name. She gives the name, you are the God who sees me. So I've got the Hebrew up there, El Roy, which means the God who sees, or the God who sees me. So she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her, you are the God who sees me, for she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well was called Bir Lahai Roy. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. Probably not still there, but at the time that this was written, it was still there. So, so who is this individual? And I can tell you what I think, but really, the idea here is, and I believe that this is inspired by God, and that He intends for it to conjure some mystery. And I'll talk about a couple more, and then we'll kind of bring this to a conclusion. But Genesis 22, you guys are very familiar with this. One of my favorite pieces of Scripture in the Old Testament, where God comes to Abraham and says, I want you to take your son, your only son, and take him up to Mount Moriah and offer him as a sacrifice there. And Abraham just does what God called him to do. Let's start at verse 9 of Genesis 22. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. Abraham is, well over 100 at this point in time, and his son is very likely, in his 30s. So this 100-year-old man is going to bind this 30-some-odd-year-old man and lay him on an altar, which intrigues me. And this is totally an aside to this discussion, but it intrigues me that Isaac was submissive to this. And, the Scriptures don't address it, that's Isaac's, state of mind. I just find the correlation between Isaac and Jesus and the willingness to sacrifice because Father asked him to be a big brushstroke in this story. Anyway, Abraham took the wood, verse 6. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife. The two of them went together. Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, Father, yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and the wood are here, Isaac said, but where's the lamb and the burnt offering? Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there, arranged the wood on it, and he bound his son Isaac. and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. And Abraham said, Here I am. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God. So is the angel of the Lord God, or is it an angel? Because you have not withheld from me, your son, your only son. Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. And to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord. Now this is, the statement here is very ambiguous. Is the angel saying, I swear by myself? Or is God speaking through the angel? And by the way, we can do this all day long. There are zillions of these. Zillions, give or take, in the scriptures. Exodus chapter 3 is one. Moses at the burning bush, where the angel of the Lord is talking to Moses, and it's impossible from the original language to determine whether it's an angel talking to him or Jehovah talking to him. But one of the most, Numbers 22, by the way, one of my favorites is Balaam on his way to curse the Israelites. You guys remember? You remember what happened? The angel of the Lord stood in the middle of the road, and Balaam couldn't see him. And he had his sword drawn, and the donkey saw this, and the donkey, tried to maneuver around the angel, and Balaam got angry, and he was pounding on the donkey. You guys remember? I love Shrek. You guys, that whole animated, all of them were really good, and I get a kick out of it. Except, they've got a talking donkey in that story too, and it's a jab at Christians, just so you know. But there is this again, this ambiguity in that story. It's difficult to tell whether the angel is talking to Abraham or whether Jehovah is talking to Abraham. But I want you to focus with me real quickly at 23 of Exodus. So God speaking to the nation of Israel. He said, "See, I am sending an angel ahead of you to guard you along the way and to bring you to the place that I have prepared. Pay attention to him and listen to what he says." Listen to what who says? This angel that he's sending ahead of. "Do not rebel against him. He will not forgive your rebellion, since my name is in him." Well, who in the world is this guy? And again, I think there's intentional ambiguity. There's just no explanation. But I can tell you that if you jump over to 1 Corinthians 10, and we could do several verses like this, but just jump over to 1 Corinthians 10 quickly, and then we'll wrap this up. Paul, in this particular chapter anyway, speaking specifically to Jewish believers, he says, "I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers, that our forefathers were all under the cloud and that they all passed through the sea. Well, what's he talking about? He's talking about Exodus. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food. Now, Paul, who regularly mixes his metaphors, okay? I mean, he does, but in this case, he's going to mix his metaphors enough that you're going to be scratching your head, okay? So I'm just putting you on notice. So verse 2, these people who came through the sea and were baptized in the cloud, they were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them. This rock accompanied them? This rock, I mean, what does it mean typically when you say, well, I went to Pier yesterday and, Sabrina accompanied me. Well, she went with me, right? So, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. So, Paul is saying here that there is a sense in which Jesus himself was following with the children of Israel in the days of the Exodus. And I'm not going to say that I think that the angel of Jehovah in the Old Testament is Jesus. I don't know. I do know this, that, and in fact, initially I had begun putting this together, this idea of the Trinity, or the triune nature of God and the triune nature of humanity, and the fact that we are physical beings, spiritual being, and emotional, mental being. So you've got body, soul, and spirit. We've talked quite a bit about that, and it seems that is consistent with the way God is made up as well. But when we are resurrected so do you guys believe that we're going to be resurrected? Mm-hmm. That at some point God's going to raise us? I mean, it's not going to just be disembodied spirits in heaven. The indication is 1 Corinthians 15. If you don't read any other passage, read that, where Paul talks about the fact that my body's going to be raised in incorruptible, but the indication is there's a physicality about it. We are so used to flesh being a part of the problem. It's decaying. It's falling apart. I'm getting older. My knees hurt when I wake up in the morning. That's what racquetball does to you. But the truth of the matter is, there is this narrative in the scriptures that indicate that we're going to be raised physical, spiritual, and soul beings. And so the idea that God would have a physical nature, and we know He does. I mean, there's even scenes in the Old Testament where He allows someone to see, His back, for instance. So I just, I think this angel of Jehovah, you do your own study and you come up with your own conclusions. I think this angel of Jehovah is an incredibly interesting discussion. I think at the end of it all, it all boils down to this, that you're going to have to embrace this on faith. And if it produces some mystery in the scriptures, then I think that's exactly what God intended for it to do. So, Bradley, step up here and lead us.